Hey peoples, Ollie from Reflections Aquatics in Melbourne here, and we thought we'd start to bring you some informational and instructional videos on reef keeping and fish keeping. And there's probably no better way than to kick that off with a video on how to cycle an aquarium and the nitrogen cycle. If you're a beginner just coming into the hobby, setting up your first tank, you'll find this video very handy. I'd also like to go into more detail about the nitrification process, nitrifying bacteria, its role in a closed system, and hopefully this video can also be beneficial to mid-level reef keepers and fish keepers, because you can run into some situations down the track, such as power outs and sudden losses of fish and livestock, where if you have a good understanding of nitrifying bacteria, it puts you in a way better position to deal with these situations. So, what does it mean to cycle an aquarium? When we refer to cycling an aquarium, we're talking about establishing a bunch of beneficial bacteria that can feed on and process all of the waste created by the livestock in that system. I should mention, guys, that here at Reflections we are saltwater and marine specialists. We don't sell any freshwater livestock. However, the cycling process in both salt and freshwater is pretty much the same. So the information you gather from this video can be used to help cycle both fresh and saltwater systems. Rightio, so when we set up a new fish tank, we're about to throw a bunch of fish, coral, inverts, etc. into the system. And all of these animals and organisms create waste. Now that waste breaks down into ammonia. And ammonia is very toxic to fish and living organisms. So what we're trying to do when we cycle a tank is establish a large colony of beneficial bacteria that can feed on and process all of this ammonia into nitrate. Now it's actually a two-step process. First, a set of bacteria will develop that converts the ammonia into nitrite. Now, nitrite is also toxic to fish and living organisms, so we're trying to avoid any detectable levels of ammonia and nitrite in our systems. So first, this original set of bacteria called Nitrosomonas bacteria will start converting the ammonia into nitrite. Then a second set of bacteria called Nitrobacter and/or Nitrospirobacteria will start to colonize and convert that nitrite into nitrate. So as the tank cycles, we're establishing large colonies of both of these sets of bacteria, and they're quickly converting all of the ammonia into nitrite and nitrate. Now nitrate is nowhere near as toxic as ammonia and nitrite. Fish can tolerate moderate levels of nitrate, however we're still trying to keep the nitrate low in our systems. Moderate to high levels of nitrate will hinder the growth of fish. A lot of coral won't tolerate moderate to high levels of nitrate. Some corals won't even tolerate lowish levels of nitrate. So that's another video down the track when we'll start talking about how to keep the nitrate down in your system. I'll touch on that a little bit when we get into filter media, but basically think of the cycling process as ammonia being converted as quickly as possible, pretty much instantly, into nitrate through the use of beneficial bacteria. So let's talk about nitrifying bacteria. Where does this bacteria accumulate in our aquariums? It's not floating through the water so much, it's looking for surface area to attach to and colonize there. So the more surface area we can provide for this nitrifying bacteria, the larger quantities of this bacteria we'll have in our aquariums. So therefore, what type of filter media would be ideal for this nitrifying bacteria? Before I get into filter media, actually, I should mention that this form of filtration is called biological filtration. We are using natural bacteria to filter our water. There are different types of filtration. Probably the main two types of filtration you'll hear about in regards to aquariums are biological filtration, what we're talking about right now, and mechanical filtration. Mechanical filtration is basically just the removal of particles through sponge, filter mat, filter socks, etc. There's also chemical filtration, the removal of chemicals, things like carbon, and there are some other products on the market that can help with that. There's reverse osmosis filtration, which we use to filter our tap water, but generally in aquariums you're mostly going to hear about biological filtration and mechanical filtration. So what type of filter media is going to be the most suitable to harbour large quantities of our nitrifying bacteria? In a reef tank, we generally use live rock as our main source of biological filter media. Live rock is generally extremely porous and provides a great amount of surface area for your nitrifying bacteria. In terms of media on the market suitable for biological filtration, there are many options. The old trusty BioBall was popular over the years. As you can see here, this is a BioBall, which is basically a plastic ball that's hollowed out and cut out with slots and cross sections through the middle, providing obviously more surface area than a solid ball would. I still use a few of these in some of our fish only systems here, but there are way more efficient types of filter media on the market these days. One type of filter media that's become extremely popular over the last few years is called Marine Pure. Now Marine Pure are highly porous ceramic blocks. As you can see in the image here, there's thousands of nooks and crannies for your nitrifying bacteria to take hold, but they come with the extra added benefit that in the center of these blocks, in the core of these blocks, you will actually start to develop a different type of bacteria, an anaerobic bacteria that can actually remove nitrate and phosphate from the system. Now, phosphate comes into your fish tanks through food. Every time you add some food to your tank, a bit of phosphate comes in. So that's another thing that accumulates over time in a fish tank. Now, when it comes to these anaerobic zones, the larger the Marine Pure block, the larger that anaerobic zone in the center will be. With these smaller blocks that you see in the image, if they're put into a high flow area of the fish tank, they're probably going to get less anaerobic activity within that core. Another type of popular filtration media is called Saporax. Now, Saporax are highly porous glass noodles, and like Marine Pure, they also will provide both great surface area for your nitrifying bacteria to colonize and inner segments where anaerobic bacteria can take place for nitrate and phosphate removal. So let's look at some different methods of cycling tanks and cycling different types of setups. With reef tanks, most people use live rock to cycle their tank. And we call it live rock because it's rock that's covered in lots of different types of marine organisms. Everything from coral to sponge, algae. There can be hitchhiking shrimp and crabs that come in with the rock. All kinds of organisms that can make their way down from the reef into our tanks. But through transport, there will also be lots of organisms that die. So when we sell a customer some fresh live rock and they add it to their system, there's generally quite a bit of stuff dying off on that rock as well, and that is a great source of ammonia to kick off the cycle. Now, how long it will take to cycle a tank with live rock will depend on just how much die-off is in that rock. So it can take as long as 6 weeks, in most cases 3 to 4 weeks. We also have what we call cycled or cured rock, which just means rock that's been sitting in a system for more than 4 or so weeks already. It's already been through a cycle. Everything that's died off in the rock has died off already, and it's already colonized with nitrifying bacteria. So it's possible to set up a new aquarium and cycle a new aquarium with cured rock like this very quickly, but it will depend on what type of cycle this rock has been through. I'll give you an example. Now let's say I get a shipment of really high quality live rock through, meaning live rock that's got lots and lots of life on it, which would also have lots of die-off on it. When I load that rock into our live rock system, there'll be lots of ammonia forming due to all that die-off. but in turn there'll also be large quantities of nitrifying bacteria colonizing to deal with that load. 4 or so weeks later, when that rock is cycled, it's going to be saturated with nitrifying bacteria, and if I sell that cycled rock to a customer, they can take that back home into their system and pretty much cycle their system instantly with that kind of colony of nitrifying bacteria. This is what we call a strong cycle. Now, on the other hand, if I get a shipment of B-grade rock that doesn't come with a great deal of life on it, or maybe branching live rock, which usually doesn't have a great deal of life on it, and throw that into my system, there's not going to be a huge amount of ammonia forming, meaning that there won't be huge amounts of bacteria needed to deal with that load. That's what we call a light cycle, and by the time that rock has cycled through, I could still pass that on to a customer. They take that back into their system and their tank would be cycled, but it would not have anywhere near as great a quantities of bacteria as rock that had been through a strong cycle, meaning that they'd have to go easier on stocking their tank and not put in too much of a load too quickly. Okay, so that's how we cycle with live rock. Now, some people don't like bringing hitchhikers into their systems. There's a lot of beneficial stuff that comes in on live rock, but there's also some problematic things that may hitchhike into your tank through live rock. Things like mantis shrimp, bristle worms, aggressive types of algae. So another option is to use what's called artificial, synthetic or ceramic rock. The main company that we deal with here in Australia is called Real Reef Rock, and this rock also provides good surface area for your nitrifying bacteria. But how would we go about cycling a tank when we're using artificial rock or any other type of biological media? When we just throw a bunch of media or artificial rock into a system, we need to then feed that system some ammonia to kick off the cycle. Otherwise, the system is just sitting there sterile. So if we're using artificial rock for a reef tank or bio balls or marine pure or any type of filter media for a fish-only tank, we need to introduce some ammonia somehow to kick off the cycle. So there are numerous ways that we could do this. We could throw an old prawn into the system, let that decompose, that will create some ammonia, and in turn your bacteria will start to colonize and the tank will start to cycle. The average cycle takes about 4 weeks. Now, some people don't want to wait that long. And these days there are some products on the market to help speed up that process. You can actually buy nitrifying bacteria in a bottle. There's been lots of brands around over the years, but probably the one that I find that works the best is a product called Dr. Tim's One and Only. Now with Dr. Tim's One and Only, you'll add some ammonia chloride to the system on a kind of daily basis. You'll throw in the Dr. Tim's nitrifying bacteria and generally have your tank cycled in about 2 weeks as opposed to 4 or 5 weeks. So if you're in a rush to cycle your tank, Dr. Tim's is a good option. Now I should also mention that high flow oxygen and higher temperatures will also allow nitrifying bacteria to colonize and multiply faster. So if you were cycling a goldfish tank and had some heaters lying around, even though you're intending to set this up as a cold water tank, you could add some heaters to that tank, get the water up to about 28 degrees, and your nitrifying bacteria will colonize faster. In terms of oxygen and flow, the more oxygen that the nitrifying bacteria has to utilize, the faster it can multiply. So it generally will colonize faster in high oxygen, high flow areas. Okay, so let's talk about testing. It's essential to test through this cycling process, so you'll need to get yourself an ammonia test kit, a nitrite test kit, and a nitrate test kit. In the first week of the cycle, you'll see the ammonia spike, and then as that first set of bacteria, the nitrosomonas bacteria starts to kick in, it'll start processing that ammonia into nitrite. As the nitrite starts to come up, that second set of bacteria, the Nitrobacter and or Nitrospira bacteria, will then start converting that nitrite into nitrate. So you're going to see ammonia come up, nitrite start to come up, and ammonia start to come down. You'll get to a stage where you've got both ammonia and nitrite. The ammonia will bottom out. You'll be left with some nitrite towards the end of the cycle. That will slowly bottom out. And then when you've got no detectable levels of both ammonia and nitrite, your tank is cycled. At that stage, you'll be left with nitrate, and you'll be getting readable levels of nitrate. But basically, we're looking for no detectable levels of ammonia and nitrite. That's when the fun starts, and you can start to add some fish, inverts, etc. to your system. So now that the tank's cycled and you're ready to add some new fish, coral, etc., it's a good idea to go slow. Don't add too many fish too quickly. Add a fish or two, test for ammonia and nitrite in the days following those new additions, just to make sure that you had a strong enough cycle to handle the load. A week or so later, add another fish or two, etc., etc. Now, a month or so after the cycle, as the tank's established itself, you really don't need to be testing for ammonia and nitrite anymore. It shouldn't resurface unless you bump into the unfortunate situation of possibly a power out or a large loss of fish or inhabitants. You may go away for the weekend and return to find multiple fish have died over the weekend and are decomposing in the tank. That's a good time to test for ammonia and nitrite, just to make sure that the nitrifying bacteria in your system could handle that die-off and that load. Now, power outs are a very dangerous situation. When the power goes out and all of the water stops circulating in your fish tank and stops drawing in oxygen from the surface, in a reef tank, the protein skimmer stops working. Protein skimmers also create a lot of oxygen. The tank will lose oxygen relatively quickly. Fish, coral, your nitrifying bacteria, most of the inhabitants in your fish tank all rely and survive on oxygen. So as soon as the tank stops circulating and producing oxygen, all of these animals and bacteria are now starting to strip the water of oxygen, and it can happen quite quickly. Now, once the water is stripped of oxygen completely, your bacteria is going to die off, and your fish, coral, are going to start to struggle and eventually will die as well if you can't get oxygen back into that system. So how do we deal with a situation like this? How can we counter this? Well, the only way to counter this is to really set up a backup generator, but most of us aren't in a position to do that. There are battery operated air pumps on the market that don't really work too well, or at least the ones that I've tested. Worst case scenario, if the power goes out of your home, get your arm in that tank and circulate and stir that water and hope that the power comes back on soon. But it really is a dangerous situation when the power goes out and your tank stops running. So if you do have the unfortunate situation of a power out, depending on how long the power's been out for, will depend on how much of your nitrifying bacteria has died. You may only lose a little bit. If it's a short power out, you may lose all of your nitrifying bacteria. So in these situations, it's a good idea to use a product like Dr. Tim's One and Only. Get as much nitrifying bacteria back into the system as you can. You could grab some cycled live rock. You could get some filter media from a friend or from a shop, but you need to re-establish as much nitrifying bacteria as quickly as possible. I should probably make mention of what we call wet-dry filters. In a situation like this, in a power out, wet-dry filters or trickle systems have a great advantage in that they are in open oxygen. All of your filtration media is still sitting in open air in a sense. You know, they might be in an enclosed chamber, but there's oxygen running through that chamber. So although the oxygen has been stripped out of the water in the tank, the filtration media is still getting oxygen. So as long as that doesn't dry out and you're killing the bacteria through letting it dry out, when the power does come back on, you'll still have all of your beneficial bacteria sitting in the main chamber of your filter. It may just mean throwing some water over that filter chamber every now and then to keep it wet or damp. So WetDry filters do have a big advantage in that sense. A canister filter, on the other hand, when the power goes out, you've got a canister filter full of media, full of nitrifying bacteria. It's no longer circulating and getting oxygenated water from the tank. That bacteria will strip the oxygen out of that small canister very quickly and in turn die. So in a power out, if you were using a canister filter on a freshwater tank, it's a good idea to open up the canister, get that media or those trays of media out, maybe wrap them up in some wet newspaper to keep them from drying out, but keep them oxygenated until you can get the power back on. Now, another good thing to do following a power out would be to add more pumps to the system, add more water circulation, add more water agitation to the system. As mentioned earlier, the more oxygen available to the nitrifying bacteria, the quicker it can multiply. Now, I touched on this earlier, but I just want to push the point that there's practically no, if any, nitrifying bacteria in the water column itself. It binds to surfaces. I've heard a lot of customers over the years talk about passing friends buckets of water from their aquariums to kickstart their friends' cycles. It doesn't work like that. If you were to give your friend a bunch of filter media from your tank or some live rock from your tank, that would help kickstart their cycle. But just passing on water to a friend from your established aquarium won't be of much help. Right, so let's summarize. What are we trying to achieve when we cycle a tank? We're trying to establish a large quantity of beneficial bacteria that can process all of the waste and ammonia in the tank and convert it into nitrate pretty much instantly, so that we're not getting any detectable levels of ammonia and nitrite in our water. Where does this nitrifying bacteria colonize? Well, it colonizes on surfaces everywhere, but will multiply and colonize most in high oxygen, high flow areas. What type of filtration should you use on your system? Well, there's lots of different options there. We've been through that. Usually on reef tanks, we're going to be using live rock or synthetic rock. Freshwater systems, trickle systems are a good way to go in my opinion, because as mentioned, if you have a power out, you have that comfort of being able to keep all of your nitrifying bacteria alive. Canisters also do work well, but you need to be home if there's a power out so that you can open it up and provide some oxygen to that nitrifying bacteria. Now, I should also mention that biological filtration and nitrifying bacteria is not the only way of dealing with ammonia in an aquarium. The other way of processing ammonia in aquariums is through algae, through refugiums and algae scrubbers, but that's a different video. This video we're primarily concerned with nitrifying bacteria as your main source of biological filtration. Alrighty, so that pretty much wraps it up, guys. If you've got any questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, etc. If you're local in Melbourne, pop into the shop. We're always happy to help. So get at us if need. And in the meantime, happy reef keeping, happy fish keeping, and enjoy whatever else you're doing with your life. Ciao.